exactly is your goal with the chemotherapy program?
When I got diagnosed back in 2004, the doctors told me I had cancer, and it's kind of like getting hit over the head with a club. Then they said you got to go through chemotherapy. I didn't even know what to ask. It was probably the most confusing time of my life, and it was the time that I really needed to have the most clarity. I wish that that website, chemomythsorfacts.com, existed when I was there. The thrust of this campaign is to get people that are in that similar situation a place that they can go to and get accurate, relevant, and timely information about what they're going to be going through, what they can expect, some of the myths or facts surrounding chemotherapy, how to talk to their doctors, other sources that they can use for advocacy for themselves on this. It's a place where they can get that knowledge and education, clear their minds, and start their journey.
For me personally, I lost both of my parents to cancer, and I'm not a big fan of chemotherapy. How do you sell me on this?
It's not about chemotherapy, it's about surviving. When I was diagnosed and I talked to my oncologist, I went and got a second opinion. My best long-term survival rates involved chemotherapy. Once I wrapped my head around that, I needed to know the how, what's, when's, why's of going through this, of facing this. There's a lot of people. I think there's 650,000 people that are going to face chemotherapy this year. It's a stunning number. What we're trying to do is help them get some focus, help them get some direction, help them get some guidance.
Obviously, this is a topic that affects you personally, but I have to think because of your outspokenness on what you went through, you've heard some pretty amazing stories. What are some of the stories that people have come to you with regarding their battles with cancer and their issues with chemotherapy?
It never stops for me, and it's a tremendous burden in some ways to meet and interact with so many people that are going through an illness that is so serious. I was going to get tickets this morning and a gentleman was in the line and told me his wife just had a lumpectomy yesterday. Last week I talked to a lady who's a great friend of mine who's going to go through some procedures here. A couple days ago I talked to another gentleman that's going through chemotherapy. In my life, every week I'm speaking to somebody that's going through something that difficult. And it's difficult, but I realize that I'm not saying my purpose is or was to have gotten cancer so that I can do this. I'm saying that because I've gone through cancer, because I've gone through chemotherapy, and because I'm still here, I think I'm a very useful tool to help people get their head wrapped around what they're going to go through.
Misconception about going through chemo is?
You know, it's such a personal thing. With me, I had a lot of friends calling me, and every one of them wished me well. And the interesting thing is a lot of people just don't quite know how to deal with you when you're sick. And I'm still me, I just have a serious illness. And a lot of my friends were saying you won't be able to go work, and you're certainly not going to be able to go race. Well, those are some things that I went to my oncologist and we sat down and we talked about this. I explained to him clearly, here's the things that I go through on an average day at work, here's what my racing entails. And I took a lot of precautions, wanted to be reasonable about this and be as safe as I could, but I was still able to teach on all the days that the drag racing school had classes. I only missed 2 of those, and I went to every race but 2 during my chemotherapy. So that turned out to be a myth in my particular case.
What kind of work do you do with the families that have to deal with the illness of their loved ones?
I think a lot of times a support group is the forgotten element here. You have that person that's going to deal with cancer, that's going to go through chemotherapy, but
it hurts everyone else.
Oh, and I think talking to the family members is sometimes even more important because there's a sense of helplessness that they have. They don't know what to do. And it gets back to, this is somebody that you care deeply about, and they're sick. If they had the flu, you wouldn't ignore them or put them in a plastic bubble per se. With chemotherapy, you're going to have to take some precautions, and this is why, and this is one of the thrusts of the Chemo Myths or Facts website. Get on there, and it encourages you to sit down with your doctor, talk about your specific circumstances. And you know, friends and family members, if the patient wants that, are one of the most wonderful sources of advocacy that you can get on this. For me, it worked out a bunch. I had Stacy Cannon, who is the godmother to my children, her and her husband Brent went with me to my first few appointments. They helped take notes. They helped make sure that every question I had got answered before I left the doctor's office. And I'm telling you, it was enormously helpful. As a patient, my head was spinning a little bit in there, and it was tough to gain some focus. I am big on having an advocate or multiple advocates, so talking to the family members has been a big part of this.
Cancer, which was 1979.
Yeah.
I mean, it was pretty archaic back in those days. And my dad had cancer in 2003, after he passed too as well.
You know what, Bobby? You bring up such a great point. I've done some media.
Died in 67.
Well, I've done some media programs with Dr. Patrick Cobb, who is an oncologist and part of the Chemo Myths or Facts campaign. And one of the things that he tells people is, he says, you got to remember, we're continuing to do research. Chemotherapy is continuing to evolve. What was true 5 years ago or 10 years ago may not necessarily be true anymore. And a lot of times people will go research. They'll click on the web, they'll go through articles. The problem is those articles aren't necessarily dated. The Chemo Myths or Facts website, everything is up to date on that. You can get the latest information on treatments, on places to go, on cancer support centers that could help people out. So don't compare what somebody might go through today with what happened 10 or 20 years ago. We're doing everything that we can to advance that research and treatment.